This video has been brought to you by NordVPN. A hero and a villain are similar in almost every way, including their quest for greater power, in almost every way except for one. The world of writing, and the world of fiction writing in particular, is one filled with questions, not to mention the constant journey of exploration to discover answers to these questions. And one question that has become increasingly commonplace revolves around the topic of villains. After all, the heroic Superman is opposed by the evil genius of Lex Luthor, the great Sherlock Holmes is challenged by the devious Professor Moriarty, and the noble Luke Skywalker faces down the eternally vile incompetency of Rian Johnson, also Darth Vader. Every good hero needs a defining villain to stand against them, something extreme, something evil, a personification of vice to counter the hero's virtue. Where Superman uses his natural gifts to humbly serve others, Lex Luthor uses his natural gifts to arrogantly serve his own ego. Where Sherlock Holmes uses his analytical genius to fight the toughest of crime, Moriarty uses his genius to create the most devious of criminal empires. Where Luke Skywalker uses his strength in the Force to defend the galaxy, Darth Vader uses his strength in the Force to dominate the galaxy. And with that in mind, the question often asked is, what defines a villain? Heroes, anti-heroes, villains, anti-villains. With so many different types of characters in modern media constantly defining and redefining our perceptions of bad guys and good guys, is there a foundational definitive difference between a hero and a villain? Well, let's see. Many of us know of Joseph Campbell's famed monomyth, also known as the hero's journey. But is there such a thing as the villain's journey? Is the execution done on Cawdor? Are not those in commission yet returned? My liege, they are not yet come back, but I have spoke with one that saw him die, who did report that frankly he confessed his treason, implored your highness's pardon, and set forth a deep repentance. Nothing in his life became him like the leaving of it. He died as one that had been studied in his death, to throw away the dearest thing he owed, as 'twere a careless trifle. William Shakespeare's play, Macbeth, my personal favorite, is both a compelling tragedy and an excellent display of what pushes a good man into evil. The death of the traitorous Thane of Cawdor, whose defeat ultimately foreshadows Macbeth's own dismal fate and hints towards that one life-changing decision that defines the difference between hero and villain. To summarize, Macbeth, the Thane of Glamis, is rewarded by King Duncan for his bravery against the king's enemies, the reward being the title Thane of Cawdor, a title that is next in line for the Scottish throne, just beneath the Scottish prince. In other words, should King Duncan and his son be removed from the picture, the Thane of Cawdor would then become king. King Duncan would then award this title to Macbeth, believing him to be loyal, and then feast at his home in celebration. Lady Macbeth pushes her husband to murder the king and blame the guards, which he eventually does. The prince flees in fear of being blamed for arranging the murder, and Macbeth is elevated to the throne. I am Thane of Cawdor. If good, why do I yield to that suggestion whose horrid image doth infix my hair, and make my seated heart knock at my ribs? Against the use of nature, present fear are less than horrible imaginings. My thought, whose murder yet is but fantastical, shakes so my single state of man that function is smothered in surmise, and nothing is but what is not. Macbeth is haunted by the guilt of his actions and the fear of the consequences. He would eventually commit one horrible deed after another, including betraying his best friend Banquo and fridging the wife of Macduff, Thane of Fife. And Macbeth, of course, loses his good name, his conscience, his wife, his mind, and finally, his life, all as a cost to his ambition. Macbeth, a once great and loyal hero, a respected and virtuous man, fallen to evil. But why? Perhaps Banquo summarized it best when he said, "Oftentimes to win us to our harm, the instruments of darkness tell us truths, win us with honest trifles, to betray us in deepest consequence." However, where Macbeth shows us the tragic fall of a good man turned evil, Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, despite how highly or lowly you might regard superhero comics, compares both sides of the raging moral conflict that constantly rages between villains and heroes. In fact, this is the stated goal of the villainous Joker, the so-called point he's trying to make. The point being that when faced with a certain moment, one that forces a certain choice, anyone would disregard societal and personal morality and choose madness, choose villainy. And this is what he uses to taunt the heroic Batman, and becomes the driving motivation for his crimes throughout The Killing Joke. shooting Barbara Gordon, torturing her as she lies paralyzed on the ground, kidnapping her father, Batman's friend, Jim Gordon, stripping him naked, and attacking him with images of his daughter's torture. I've demonstrated there's no difference between me and everyone else. All it takes is one bad day to reduce the sanest man alive to lunacy. That's how far the world is from where I am. Just one bad day. You had a bad day once, am I right? I know I am. I could tell you had one bad day and everything changed. Why else would you dress up like a flying rat? And there it is. Why Batman is such a mystery to the Joker. Because like any villain, when he was faced with that one certain life event, when he was faced with a personal choice between good and evil, evil was the only choice that made sense. Anything else is weakness, false, or delusion. And this is echoed in Joker's frustrated rant to Batman. You have to keep pretending that life makes sense, that there's some point to all this struggling. Because we know Batman's answer. Yes, he did have a bad day that changed his life forever. The moment Bruce Wayne's parents are murdered in Crime Alley, Bruce dedicated his life to becoming Batman, and the difference between Batman and the Joker highlights the one defining moment that determines hero or villain. Why? Because the Joker experienced something similar. Something like that happened to me, you know. When I saw what a black, awful joke the world was, I went crazy as a coot. I admit it. It's all a joke. Everything anyone's ever valued or struggled for, it's all a monstrous, demented gag. So why can't you see the funny side? Why aren't you laughing? Joker's point is that Batman is unique, that when faced with one life-changing bad day, people would choose madness and villainy, just like the Joker did. Except for one problem. James Gordon didn't go mad. And Barbara Gordon, despite being tortured and becoming paralyzed, never turned to evil either. Like so many villains, rather than humble themselves and face their own weaknesses, or even the possibility of weakness, he embraced his failing as a strength. The Joker fell into madness, thinking nihilism the obvious, more enlightened path, when it's really just the cowardly one. But as Batman reveals, when given the choice, the logical course of action isn't evil. As Batman says, maybe ordinary people don't always crack. Maybe there isn't any need to crawl under a rock with all the other slimy things when trouble hits. Maybe it was just you all the time. In other words, Batman and the Joker came to the same point on their journey, and where the Joker only saw one path forward, Batman saw it as a crossroads, a choice between good and evil, and of course, chose good. But again, why? The story of the great Star Wars villain Darth Vader might waver considerably in quality, but hits on a point neither Macbeth nor The Killing Joke explore: a villain's redemption. Probably one of the most famous villainous redemptions in all of American pop culture. Much like Macbeth, Darth Vader also begins as a great hero, a man named Anakin Skywalker who became a famed champion during the era known as the Clone Wars. And like The Killing Joke, the journey of Anakin Skywalker shows a character reaching a crossroads on their journey and making a choice. However, because the different aspects of morality are present in a single character, we can focus on the shift itself rather than the two stories of Batman and the Joker. Anakin Skywalker, a fallen hero, a man who has been both the face of virtue and villainy. So what exactly defines these stages in Anakin's life? When did he make that shift from hero to villain to ultimate redemption? Without hammering on the infamous quality of the Star Wars prequel trilogy, we can see Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader's change highlighted in two significant moments in his life. The first was the moment Anakin Skywalker switched from hero to villain. The pain of losing his mother and the fear of losing his wife and children drove him to seek a way to prevent these losses, even if it meant turning to the dark side. And when it seemed the answer only existed down the dark path, that's exactly where he went. Anakin succumbed to his fear and turned to evil. But what about his redemption? The moment Darth Vader redeemed himself was the moment he rekindled his humanity. The moment Darth Vader embraced the love he had for his family and sacrificed his own life and all of his power to save those he truly cared about. And in that moment, we have our answer. What may be the foundational difference between a hero and a villain? An aspect summarized in this exchange. Palpatine. The Sith and the Jedi are similar in almost every way, including their quest for greater power. Anakin Skywalker. The Sith rely on their passion for their strength. They think inwards, only about themselves. And the Jedi don't. The Jedi are selfless. They only care about others. So what exactly are we getting at here? What defines the villain's journey? Joseph Campbell likely put it best when he said, "Sorry to cut in, but I absolutely disagree. Literature Angel, what the heaven are you doing here? I traced your IP address, of course." "You traced my IP address to the land of nightmares and vicious shadows?" "I certainly did, and it looks like you forgot that NordVPN hides your IP address and secures your personal data from all those malicious miscreants looking to collect your vital information, or champions of justice looking to invade your devilish YouTube videos? You didn't actually disagree. You just wanted to hear yourself talk, didn't you? More or less, yes. But you do have a point. Not only can I hide my IP address from eavesdropping angels and protect my personal data from eavesdropping angels, I've already seen all your personal data. You should be ashamed. I could also switch my location to anywhere I please, allowing me to unlock worldwide access to everything from sports to movies, even when traveling abroad. And I am a big fan of freedom, you know. Plus, Nord is much more than a VPN. It also guards you from malware, dangerous files, and malicious annoying ads with just one simple click. Did someone say annoying? What? No, wait! Ah, works like a charm. Check out the description below to try NordVPN risk-free with their 30-day money-back guarantee. Now, back to the video. As I was saying, Joseph Campbell noted that the foundational element of heroism is sacrifice. To quote, "It's a great day to die. They're not hanging on. That's the message of the myth. You, as you know yourself, are not the final term of your being, and you must die to that. One way or another, in giving of yourself to something, or in being annihilated actually, physically, to return you might say, or to recognize. Life is always on the edge of death, always, and one should lack fear and have the courage of life. That's the principal initiation of all of the heroic stories. Keeping that in mind, let's take a look at the hero's journey, the legendary narrative structure that takes a lowly young protagonist and changes them into a powerful hero, the one famous for serving as the narrative engine for the legendary Star Wars franchise, a journey made from a plethora of parts that lead us from one point to another. The call to adventure, crossing the threshold, walking the road of trials. And it's the road of trials that contains the one point that defines whether a character is a villain or a hero. Specifically this part, temptation. To recall the words of Palpatine, the Sith and the Jedi are similar in almost every way, including the quest for greater power. While to some, pursuing greater power might not feel heroic, it might even feel villainous, the core trait of maturity is developing and improving oneself, gaining skill, building a legacy. And for a hero, their journey often does involve a quest for greater power. Luke Skywalker's quest to grow in the Force, Neo's quest to perfect his mastery over the Matrix, and Bruce Wayne famously traveled the world seeking greater power from various masters in order to operate as a crime fighter. However, the reason the pursuit of power might feel like a villainous objective is because greater power very often is a driving motivation for many villains. Macbeth's ambition outweighed his morality and drove him to murder King Duncan and seize the Scottish crown. Lex Luthor was always in search of power that would finally allow him to overtake Superman. And Anakin Skywalker sought greater power to protect those he loved and would turn to the dark side to do so. But what is the real difference? Heroes and villains are identical in almost every way. In fact, they even travel the same journey. They leave home, they cross the threshold, they have a mentor and walk the road of trials. But it is temptation that quite often separates a hero from a villain. In the words of Joseph Campbell, difficulty lies in the fact that our conscious views of what life ought to be seldom correspond with what life really is. But when it suddenly dawns on us, or is forced to our attention, that everything we think or do is necessarily tainted with the odor of the flesh, then, not uncommonly, there is experienced a moment of revulsion. Life, the acts of life, the organs of life, a woman in particular as the great symbol of life, become intolerable to the pure soul. The seeker of life beyond life must press beyond the woman, surpass the temptations of her call, and soar to the immaculate ether beyond. In other words, a hero says, "Begone, thought," because what makes a hero isn't perfection. In fact, it's one's lack of perfection that creates a heroic, not to mention inspiring figure. The hero who eventually overcomes his flaws and conquers his fears, like when Luke Skywalker faced down his fear of becoming as evil and twisted as Darth Vader. A point that serves as a great example of how a hero and a villain act when they reach the same crossroads in their lives, because heroes and villains endure the same journey and the same trials. But when faced with temptation, a hero will reject temptation, while a villain will succumb to it. Anakin succumbed to the fear of losing what he loved. Had Luke followed the same path as Darth Vader, his intentions might have been to slay his fallen father, i.e. doing whatever it took to protect those he cared about. Instead, the optimistic Luke Skywalker dedicated himself to a higher cause, saving others. Despite all the evil Darth Vader had done, and the promise of safety his death would represent, Luke Skywalker chose the more difficult path, against all logic, even against his own masters. Luke tried to save Vader's soul even if it cost Luke his life because it was the right thing to do. To again quote Campbell, "The boy does not have a happening of that kind. He has to be turned into a man and voluntarily become a servant of something greater than himself. The woman becomes the vehicle of nature. The man becomes the vehicle of society, the societal order, the societal purpose." This is Han Solo beginning as someone dedicated to greed, but when faced with a choice, chose his companions over his own avarice. The moment that shifted Macbeth from valiant hero to traitorous villain was the night King Duncan stayed at his home. And just as Yoda and Obi-Wan, people of importance in Luke Skywalker's life, told Luke to kill Darth Vader, leading Macbeth, a person of importance in Macbeth's life, also urged Macbeth to kill King Duncan and grab power. A more heroic Macbeth would have faced this temptation, chosen loyalty, and denied the allure of power. Batman and Joker both had one bad day, one horrific event that forever changed their entire lives. What makes Joker a villain is that he failed this test. The Joker succumbed to his vices and temptations, falling into evil and lunacy. You could just step outside and close the door and all those dreadful things that happened. You could lock them away forever. Bruce Wayne rejected temptation, instead dedicating himself to becoming a crime fighter so no other child would endure what he had to endure. Batman sacrifices the pleasing allure of the passing moment, the easy fix of savage revenge, and dedicated his life to service to something greater than himself. And the moral is that the realization of your bliss, your true being, comes when you put aside the, what might be called, passing moment, with its terror and with its temptations, and its statements of requirements of life that you should live this way. Alienation, mockery, and tragedy follows many of us in our everyday lives, and it follows both hero and villain alike. They walk the same journey, and while villains will always succumb to greed or lust or pride and justify their failing as a virtue, a hero will face the same choices, suffer from the same flaws, and feel the same temptations, and a hero will selflessly place something greater over themselves, while a villain will succumb to selfishness. In other words, a hero sticks to their diet. A villain will have that second bowl of pudding you really promised yourself you wouldn't have.